it really became clear to me why women needed help all of a sudden, why there was this big force, around supporting women. And it wasn't because women were less than or not as competent. It was because what they were doing was not being received in the same way that the competency of the men were being received. Women often ask me, well, so am I supposed to just be nice all the time? Like, how do I be firm in my message? How do I say what I need to say?
What do you recommend for women in the workplace to show up more in their humanness rather than in these gendered roles that we've kind of got ourselves into?
Well, I'd really start by understanding the landscape that we're in. Sometimes it takes a moment for us to even realize what's not our piece.
What does it take to be a financially empowered woman? And what can financially empowered women do together to change the world? A shocking statistic is that around 400,000 women in Australia are at risk of homelessness. And the cause of this is the lack of education about how to build a financial foundation, starting even before we first enter the workforce and well into our retirement years. My name's Dion Payne, and I'm the founder of the Financially Empowered Women podcast. I'm passionate about ending homelessness, and as part of that passion, I chose to look at the systemic barriers that are causing homelessness for women in the first place. The Financially Empowered Women podcast is designed to bring you the best experts from around the world to increase your financial know-how and give you practical and women-specific tips to overcome the challenges you might be facing, such as how to negotiate a better salary, demystifying super, or how to navigate a separation and ensure the assets are distributed fairly. My role is to provide you with the best information out there to change your trajectory and become a financially empowered woman, because you deserve it, and the world needs you more than ever to own your worth and help others to do the same. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Financially Empowered Women podcast. I'm your host, Dion Payne, and I'm delighted to be joined by my guest, Anneli Blundell. Now let me tell you a little bit about Anneli. Anneli is an expert in communication dynamics, and she helps people get heard. Whether it's getting buy-in from the boss, collaborating with other colleagues, or simply speaking up in meetings, this is about building conversational cultures where people feel seen, heard, and valued at work. Anneli is on a mission to humanise the leadership landscape and change the conversation culture at work. Anneli is the Australian Institute of Training and Development's 2021 L&D Professional of the Year, and also a Gold Stevie Award winner for Female Entrepreneur of the Year, also in 2021. She creates conversational cultures through a carefully crafted blend of keynote speaking, executive coaching, and behavioural change programs that stick. Welcome, Anneli.
Thank you, Dion. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you today.
Me too. Now, we've done a lot of talking even before we got onto the podcast, and I know that you've got a lot that you can share around the work that you do. I am curious, though, how did you get started in this type of role?
Well, the work that I do is around communication dynamics, as per your carefully worded and crafted intro, which I may or may not have written. Thank you for that. But of course, for the last 10 or so years, I've also been specializing in working with women and empowering women in the workplace. So I'm just going to focus on that slice of the work that I do. So in terms of how did I get into this work, for me, the interesting thing is that I didn't set out to work with women. I never intended to be the woman's woman. When I first started my coaching career over 20 years ago, I remember being with a new cohort of coaches and everyone trying to work out what their niche was. And people were always saying, who's your target market and who do you coach? And of course, at the time, I'm like, what, do you breathe? Or you're probably my market. I don't know. And there was a whole bunch of people who were targeting women, who really wanted to work with women and empower women. And I just remember Dion thinking, why? What's wrong with women? Like, why do women need all this help? Why are there so many people, hell bent on supporting and helping women? And, I was a young woman at the time. I'd, spent almost a decade in the workforce already, and I felt like I was in charge of my life and my career and things were going well. And I just wondered why, what was going on with women? And it wasn't until, I'd been coaching for a number of years and as an executive coach, helping people around, the dynamics of conversation, communication, influence, engagement, impact, all those sorts of things, I started to notice patterns. I noticed that I would be working with men and women, but they would come to me for different reasons. And men would typically come with a need for how to build stronger EQ, how to be more warm and engaging and empathetic. And women would come to me for things like how to be more authoritative and more assertive. And what I noticed was it didn't matter how competent women were, they were facing obstacles in the workplace. It had nothing to do with their competencies. But the kinds of behaviors that I was seeing from men and women were the same. They were equally competent. They were speaking in similar ways at times, and yet women were having people respond to them differently than the men were getting responses. So, for example, if a woman was being overly empathetic or caring, she'd be seen as a people pleaser, a pushover. But if a man was being empathetic and caring, he was a high EQ leader. Kudos to him. If a woman was being direct and assertive, she was seen as overly aggressive. If a man was direct and assertive, he was just showing good leadership skills. And I'm like, hang on a second, what is going on here? So it really became clear to me why women needed help all of a sudden, why there was this big force, around supporting women. And it wasn't because women were less than or not as competent. It was because what they were doing was not being received in the same way that the competency of the men were being received.
As you're saying this, I'm having to bite my tongue. I had an experience yesterday where I did send a very strongly worded email. And it was just very direct. I wasn't rude, I wasn't aggressive, but it was very strongly worded because what I needed to say was said. And what I got back was, I don't appreciate your aggressive email.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, now you say it, I recognize it. This happens a lot.
Yeah, so this is one of the traps, and the book that I've recently written and published called The Gender Penalty, Turning Obstacles into Opportunities for Women at Work, is centered all around this idea of the gender penalty, right? So it's not that we're as I said before, more accomplished, less accomplished. It's not about our competency. It's about how the world receives us and the
Yeah.
lens they see women in. And so we have this expectation of women that they first and foremost, Dion, occupy the lady box, right? We're ladylike. We've got to fit our gender stereotype. And women in that gender stereotype are nice, nurturing, supportive, humble, caring, that kind of stuff. But the leadership box is strong and direct and clear and communicative and has a different angle. So for women to be seen as a lady or seen as a leader is at odds with those two expectations. But for a man, the leader box is pretty much the same as the man box, right? So direct, authoritative, in charge, in control, decisive, all that kind of stuff fits both of those boxes. So there is no incongruence and there's no backlash. So when you, as a woman, stand in your nurturing, humble, helpful way, always trying to be nice and polite because we've been conditioned to do so, then it fits with my expectation of your gender role. However, if you want to all of a sudden hold someone to account, if you need to have a difficult or direct conversation and you don't bring in the warmth that's expected of your gender, the way your directness is received is exaggerated in a negative way. We skew that lens and we go, oh my God, calm down. No need to be so aggressive, or no need to be, why are you being so rude? All that kind of stuff comes from us violating the gender norms of being ladylike and just fitting into the box of being leader-like. That's why you got that
Okay.
feedback.
Thank you for helping me unpack that.
Yes, yes. And what's really important about this, Dion, is, women often ask me, well, so am I supposed to just be nice all the time? Like, how do I be firm in my message? How
Yeah.
do I say what I need to say? Like, you might be thinking now, well, should I not have sent that email?
Oh no,
Or
I
should,
had to send that email.
yeah. All right. Assuming you are definitely going to send that email, knowing that you're going to get a backlash like that, right? And the problem with that backlash is people are now thinking, is that going to affect the relationship? Is it going to affect my reputation? Do I need an ongoing relationship with this person? How do I need to play this? So you have to ask all those questions and then come back to this decision that says, is this important enough for me to have that backlash? And if it's not, tone it down. Be
Yeah.
nicer, be fluffier, fit the ladylike box a little bit more, because it doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah.
But if this is important to you and it's important for the ongoing integrity or your brand, reputation, all that kind of stuff, then just know that it might attract backlash, and that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with the gender stereotype. So it's not yours to take on.
That is great because, and this podcast was never supposed to be about me, but it's a
Yeah.
very recent experience. So it's really
Yes.
great to be able to share this. Um, I mean, the email itself was very necessary, but I have been sort of chewing on it overnight, just going, I know I needed to send it. I know I didn't need to tone it down. And it's not a case of right or wrong. It just needed to be said in the way that it was said. But the amount of energy that it's taken up afterwards, because I violated that norm,
Yes.
that female norm, um, that's almost as it's not quite as bad as if I'd have just done the nice email, but it's almost as bad because I should be able to just let it go.
Yes. And so what you're experiencing, this is such a great conversation. I'm really glad you raised this, right? Because as
I'm
much
really
as you
grateful
say,
for the opportunity that,
yeah,
that this email came up.
that's right. And as much as you say this podcast is not about you, you are a living, breathing embodiment of your listeners, right? You are a strong, empowered, mission-driven woman out in the world trying to make a difference, as your listeners are, right? So this is stuff that's happening to you, is stuff that's happening to our people who are listening online right now. So this is it's really important to acknowledge that this is not personal. It might not make it easier, like you still might feel the feelings, but at least you can contextualize it and say, this is not about me, Dion. This is actually what happens to strong, assertive women. And this is a result of conditioning, their conditioning, my conditioning to want to be a good girl, right? To want to fix, to want to please, to want to step into the expected behaviors of keeping everything nice, right? Focusing on the relationship, not rupturing the relationships. As soon as we move into, I am being firm, I'm holding a boundary, we worry that we are rupturing the relationships. But I would argue there is always a point that we reach where we have to question, is it worth letting go of our integrity to maintain a relationship that is not serving us if we can't speak to this point right now?
100%. And it was actually more about me and holding on to my integrity in that moment, rather than, it was that reason that I just went, I have to send this email. And if I don't send this email, I'm not being true to myself. And that felt like a greater penalty than trying to massage the relationship or anything like that.
Because and this is always the trade-off, right? And this is why this is the gender penalty. There is a trade-off for women. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, right? So if you don't say something, you're training people how to treat you in a way that's not congruent with who you are, and you don't like the external impact of that. But if you make it nice and comfortable for everyone else, you can't live with yourself. So someone is going to be uncomfortable in this scenario. And I would like to say, let it be them.
Yeah.
Let it be them.
Good advice. I love it. So, in that scenario, I mean, it's great to just identify, yes, there was a difficult conversation. It needed to be said, and be prepared for the backlash. So then what's your advice on how to deal with the backlash?
Oh, that's a great question. So backlash, as I said, occurs because women are violating the gender stereotype, right? So, and you'll see the backlash occurring when, if you act in a way that creates some kind of response, that if a man acts in the same way doesn't create that same response, that's essentially the backlash we're talking about here, right? So when women are told to calm down, don't be so emotional, don't be so hysterical, don't be so aggressive, all these things where if, men did that behavior, they wouldn't get any of that. So in terms of the backlash here in the stereotype, there's a couple of things that we can do. One is know that it's not about you. And that's my main point to you at the start of this discussion. Because when you can depersonalize, now you can normalize. And when we normalize, we can collectively mobilize. If I am in that situation and I think, oh, that person just said to me, no need to be so aggressive, please don't speak to me so aggressively. If I personalize it, I go straight into, oh, I've done the wrong thing, now I'm concerned, now I need to change my behavior, oh, that's a bad reflection of me and my professionalism, yeah, right? Monkey mind goes berserk. But when I depersonalize it, I say, all right, I might take some of that on board still, that's fine. But most of that is about the gender issue. Okay, so I'm going to depersonalize. Now I'm going to normalize. That's just what happens when women are seen to be overly strong, when they're just holding a normal boundary. So that's not about me, it's more about them. And I can hold this on behalf of women everywhere. And if I can hold this on behalf of women everywhere, now I can start to mobilize against that. Because the minute I cave into it and change and become nicer again, I'm not mobilizing for change.
Mm.
We want to depersonalize so we can normalize that this is normal. This is what is going to happen if you violate that gender norm. And now if I stand strong in this, I can mobilize going forward. There is a way that you can do this to prevent or almost preempt some backlash. Here's a specific strategy. So, for example, if let's say you're at work and you're trying to chase up a report, right? And you've tried the nicely, hey, just wondering where the report is. You said you were going to have it to me by, yesterday, and I still haven't seen it. Oh, yeah, it's coming. 3 days go by. Just checking in. Where's that report? You can feel yourself getting sterner and sterner. And you feel yourself violating the gender norm of being a nice, polite woman day by day. And now you've got to the point where you're like, I need to hold a firm boundary. So knowing that you're potentially slipping into the realm of, I'm going to be seen as an overly demanding, harassing, direct female now, let me see if I can sort of cut that off at the pass. So you might use what we call a framing statement. And a framing statement is a way to call out somebody else's potential assumption or bias in a way and diffuse it before it starts. So I might say something like, on the third go around in this email or phone call, or actually this is probably better face-to-face at this point, I might say, look, at the risk of sounding like I'm harassing you, I just want to know where that report is. Or at the risk of sounding too demanding, I just want to know where that report is. right? Or at the risk of repeating myself, just want to know where the report is. So you're calling out whatever you think they might then be saying about you. You call it first, you diffuse that response, and then you get to still do your behavior or say what you want to say.
I'm taking notes. That's
I
really
see
good.
that. It's all in the book, by the way. For anyone else who's taking copious notes, it's all in the book.
Oh, fantastic. And I just love that because it's that way of being prepared. I mean, if I'd have done this podcast before having that conversation, I would have approached it differently. But it is just in being prepared for that emotional jolt that does come up because and I don't think it's just me personally. I think that as women, we do want to, keep the peace and keep relationships good. I think that's something that's really important to us. So being prepared and just going, okay, well, and even it feels like it could be almost a joke, like, at the risk of sounding like I'm nagging you, where's the
Yes.
report?
Yes. At the risk of sounding overly bossy, where's that report? Whatever. And,
Yeah.
it's interesting. You said as women, we really want to maintain that relationship and we really want to, we want that harmony with the people that we work with. And I would say it's actually a human need. We all need that, whether we consciously say, I want to be friends with people in the workplace, or we say, I don't need to be friends with people in the workplace. The reality is, we're humans, we're built to hang in tribes, and our survival rests on our ability to be part of the gang, right? So, at the deepest part of our brain, it is important to us to maintain those relationships for everyone. However, there is an added overlay for women because we have been conditioned by society to know that that is our role. It's a human need, but it's our role to take care of that, right? Because we're nurturers, we have babies, we grow humans, this is our role in life. Whereas the role for a man, or the gender box for a man, is to be the provider, is to be, in charge, is to be the leader. And so, and again, this is just stuff we have inherited from the past. I would argue it does not serve us anymore, it doesn't hold true anymore, but this is so ingrained that what we're actually fighting against is not each other. We're fighting the stereotypes, we're fighting the conditioning of what it means to be a man and a woman, or to identify as a man and a woman in the world today, without losing our unique who we are-ness, if I can say that.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it makes me think about my son. I've been blessed to have a daughter and a son. And with my daughter, it was fairly easy. I could relate to her experience as a female. With my son, it's a little bit more challenging. And I mean, he's gorgeous. I love him dearly. We have a great relationship. So it's not that, but it's more how can I, as a mother, prepare him to break down this cultural conditioning that we have, so he can just be a good human, and
Yeah,
as should we all.
yeah, and I love that that's where you're going with this, right? Because uh, every year we have International Women's Day, and now we have International Man's Day, and we're always having these conversations and marching forward, doing all these things, and that's great. Let's keep doing it. And if we really want to break these cycles, if we really want to make change, it's generational change, right? It doesn't start with us talking to the 70-year-olds who back in my day it was like this. It's generational change. So the children are the future. They really are. And if we can bring these things into conversations when they are early, when we can talk to our boys and girls in a way that doesn't gender their experience. So, for example, we know that right from early on, it's okay for boys to be rough and tumble and not do homework, or they're more an outdoorsy kind of kid, whatever it is. We're bringing layers and layers of expectations already, and by the way, they don't show emotion, they don't cry, then all that kind of stuff, right? So if we can find a way to treat them as close to human as possible, which is beyond the gender lens, which means if the little boy is crying or upset, it's okay. We encourage them to have emotions. We encourage the boys to be sensitive. We encourage the boys to listen to their own intuition about what it means to reach out with care and empathy to people, right? Not to man up and have a stiff upper lip and not cry and all that kind of stuff, right? And for girls, we encourage them to play and be rough and tumble or do whatever they want to do, right? They don't have to be neat and tidy. And guess what? They don't have to be the harmonizer all the time. And guess what? They can be bossy if they want to, because boys are bossy too. Guess what? 10-year-olds are all bossy. I don't know if you've noticed. And that's okay. That we're not telling them to be something different. We're noticing who they are and allowing that expression and particularly encouraging that expression if it's defying gender norms.
What do you mean by that last bit, by encouraging that expression if it's defying gender norms?
So, for example, with the boys, if they're crying or they're being sensitive or they're being emotional, we want to nurture that. We don't want to be like, oh, come on, Tom, get over it. It's not a big deal. We don't cry in this family. Boys don't cry, and because we know they're going to get that messaging from society as it is. So in the home, we need to say emotions are okay. It's all right to be sensitive. It's all right to be scared. You don't have to have it all together as a man or a boy. And for the women, you don't have to be the good girl all the time. You don't have to be likable all the time, right? You can have a strong opinion. You can push back. You can have confidence. It's all right to have confidence. You don't have to be humble, nurturing, the caretaker all the time.
Yeah, cool. And so in a workplace, because we are still dealing with these cultural conditioning frameworks that we've been born into. So what do you recommend for women in the workplace to show up more in their humanness rather than in these gendered roles that we've kind of got ourselves into?
Well, I'd really start by understanding the landscape that we're in. So remember we talked earlier about personalizing and then normalizing and immobilizing. So really, because we're so part of the conditioned experience, all of us together, sometimes it takes a moment for us to even realize what's not our piece, what's part of the zeitgeist that we need to be challenging and changing. So simple things like just paying attention to what is happening to you that's not happening to your male colleagues, yeah? And then making sure that you're standing for what is right for you as the worker and not you as the woman. And it might be something like, let me just think, sometimes understanding where we are part of the issue helps us break it. So for example, I remember, so this is the context, right? So I run women at work programs, I empower women, I run inclusion programs, right? I'm all about this sort of stuff. And a little while ago, I was in an electronics store and I was looking to buy, I think it was like a camera. So I was in the like drone department or whatever, and some kind of audio equipment, I can't remember what it was. And I looked over to that area and I saw someone standing there, a woman with a tag, and I looked straight over her and I looked right to the next guy, and I went over to the next guy in another department and said, I'm just looking for some information about a camera. Can you help me? And he said, yes, no worries. And he walked me all the way back to the woman standing right under the sign with the name tag and said, this is the person who can help you. And I went, oh my God. This is an example of me being part of the problem, right? Because I am so conditioned, like all of us, with these gender stereotypes that I didn't even consciously do it. My mind just went, woman doesn't know anything about electronics. I guess that's what I said. And went straight to guy must know about camera stuff. And when I spoke to this woman, she was terrific. She knew so much, very knowledgeable, and I was so mortified. And so just catching ourselves in this experience gives us empathy for everyone who is caught in the conditioned experience. So I now don't get upset when I feel like I'm being stereotyped, because guess what? I do it too. And so I can have empathy for that. And so now I feel like we're all on the same team with this. We're all trying to change the stereotypes. And you know what? The things that I want to advocate for that I think would be good for me as a woman is probably also good for men. So, for example, I've got, one of my clients, we heard in the organization that there was a imbalance between men and women coming through this particular role, and it was because it was a store manager role, and the store had to deal with a lot of heavy equipment in the storeroom, and so it was just the understanding that the store managers needed to be men because they typically had to move around a lot of heavy stock, and a small woman probably wouldn't be as capable as a big burly guy. Like, that's just what we've inherited from this role. And so we didn't have a lot of women in this role. And my first question is, well, it's not that we want to go, okay, well, let's hire small women who aren't going to be able to move this stock. It doesn't make any sense. Why would we do that? My question is, why are we making the men move around heavy stock? What if the man's got bad knees? What if he's got a bad back? What if he's just not very strong? Why don't we change the nature of the role so that it doesn't matter who you are? That is the nature of inclusion. That is the nature of equality. And so, can we get better equipment in the storeroom? Where's our moving machinery? Where's all that kind of stuff where it doesn't rely on how strong you are? It relies on your license to be able to push a button. That is equality, and that's the kind of change I want all of us to be thinking about.
That is so cool. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. What I got from that was when we look at how can we make things better for everyone versus how can we make things better for one gender or another, or one group or another, it's so much more holistic.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep. I mean, this is why we're talking about things like parental leave and not just, maternity leave, right? That
Yes.
if we keep focusing on maternity leave and we don't make it easy or accessible for men to also take parental leave, we are never going to break the cycle of women having career interruptions, of course.
Of course.
But we also know that there's an implication for expecting one gender to take the load apart from the physicality, right? Let's put breastfeeding aside for a little bit, apart from maybe some of the initial time, of course, and choices and preferences, all that kind of stuff. But let's imagine we've got two new parents who both want to be new parents and spend time with the baby, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you want to say, hey, I'm going to take 3 months and you take 3 months. Chances are the woman will get accepted straight away, but the man is more likely to get denied, or more likely, if they even have that policy, to be told in no uncertain terms, you can have it, but it's a career limiting move. Just know that no one's really taken it. And if you're serious about your career, you won't take 3 months off.
Oh my
And we
goodness.
know the impact of that is that when men take more carers leave, more parental leave, that they bond with the baby, they're more likely to do more equal housework, childcare, because they initiate themselves into what it means to parent and care for this child. So stuff starts to become more equal. They have a different lens when they're in society. They're walking around with prams. They're going to daddy daycares. They're starting to shift the system. So what's good for one is good for the other if we can both take up these things.
This is fantastic. And it makes me think of, often, and you mentioned about how you caught yourself thinking man knows about tech, woman knows nothing about tech. I catch myself thinking man with baby, good dad, you
Yeah.
know?
Right?
But it just should be normal.
Yes. And here's the overlay to this, right? So this is really fascinating part of the gender penalty because we know that when men in the workforce become new parents, they're seen as more responsible. Right? They're now the provider. You know they're going to work hard because they've got a family, so they're seen as more responsible. When women have kids in the workforce, they're seen as less committed
Yeah.
because now they're a mother, now that their loyalty is going to be at home. And so, same behavior, different societal response because of that gender lens. That is the gender penalty we're talking about, right? And in fact, this gender penalty also goes for men. So, if men cry in the workforce, oof,
Yes.
gender penalty, right?
Yep.
Now they're
Yep.
going to get a social backlash
Yep.
because they are violating the norms of what it means to be in the man box.
Nobody wins at this.
Nobody wins.
Wow.
No.
Wow. Now, Anneli, I'm so sorry. Full disclosure, I have not finished all of the questions that I wanted to ask you. So, for anybody that's watching this and is absolutely fascinated, number one, Anneli, I would love you to come back on again. And number two, you have an awesome book, and I want to talk about that in a little bit. But the last question that I really, really, really want to ask before we go is you talk about women playing a different game. Can you speak to that very briefly? Give us a teaser for the next episode.
Yes. So women and men have been conditioned to approach work in different ways. So typically, the world of work was created by men for men back in the day when it was just men on the field, as it were, and women were at home. So now that women are on the field, we're playing the game, we're playing by the old rules, and they don't fit us anymore. So the game that women are playing is actually a game of being in the classroom. That is how we've been conditioned. Men are conditioned to be on the sporting field. Women are conditioned to be in the classroom, to be the good girl, to be nice, to take care of everyone else, not put ourselves first. It's about who we are. When you're on the sporting field, it's about winning, it's about competition, it's about how you play the game. And so we are on the sporting field of the game of work and we are playing by the wrong rules. That is why we're benched. That is why we're sidelined. And that is why we're constantly being called out with this gender penalty.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I've got so much value out of this. I've got my own personal therapy as a result of this as well. Thank you so much. Now, tell us a little bit about your book and where can people find it, all of that information.
Well, it will be in the resources section of this podcast, which is fantastic. You can also go to my website, anneliblundell.com, and you can find it in the books section. There's also a book there for men. So if we have any men listeners on the line, which I hope we do, there's a pocket book for you as well, When Men Lead Women, Navigating the Facts, Fears and Frustrations of Gender Equality as a Male Leader. So that's a nice little tease into how do we get more men and women into this conversation, which is essentially what I'm all about. So you can find it any good bookstore or online at my website to begin with.
Wonderful. Anneli, thank you so much for being our guest today. This has been such a fabulous conversation and I can't wait for the next one.
Thanks, Dion.